Using selections is a big part of Photoshop, and to learn which tool is best for a particular job is very important to learn. In this video, I'm going to teach you the basic selection tools, and even with these, you can do a lot of things in Photoshop. First of all, why do we need selections? Well, to be able to combine images together or just selectively adjust parts of an image, you already need to create a selection. I'm going to start with an example where I show you how to apply an adjustment on a particular part of the image. Let's say we would like to focus on this boat here in this image, and I want to turn everything else black and white and just keep that detail in colors. So to be able to do that, first of all, we have to tell Photoshop which part is the one that we want to isolate. So for this, we can pick one of our most simple selection tool, the rectangular marquee tool. This is where you can find it, and the shortcut is M. Now, if I click and drag, I can define an area which I wanted to select. If I don't like the selection, I can always go to the select menu and choose deselect. Or I can select the whole image immediately if I choose select all. And by the way, these both have shortcuts. Select all is Control or Command A. Deselect is Control Command D. When you make a selection, you can also inverse your selection by pressing Control Shift or Command Shift I, that you can also find in the select menu, which will completely select the opposite what you selected earlier. So in my case, as you can see, I selected the boat first, but now I have everything else selected. The way you can tell where your selection is that the area surrounded with the marching ants. So this little animated outline that you can see on the screen. There is also another way to check what's selected and what's not, if you are confused. By using the quick mask, you can switch to a different view of your selection. So this is the quick mask modes button here at the bottom of the toolbar, but you can also press Q. And by default, this is what you will get. You will see the selected details in their original color, and you will see the deselected parts shielded with this red overlay. If you want, you can change this setting by double-click on the same icon in the toolbar. So there you can decide whether you want to have the masked areas or the selected areas indicated with that overlay. And you can also change the color and opacity of the quick mask. We will come back to this later because quick mask is a very useful technique. But for now, let's try to use an adjustment on our selection. So we have everything else selected apart from the boat. So let's try to turn this black and white to make a color pop in the whole image and really concentrate on the most interesting detail. So if I go to Image, Adjustments, that's where I can find the black and white adjustment. So once I choose that, I will get this dialog box in which I can adjust exactly how the conversion should be, the black and white conversion. I can even add, for example, a tint, and that way it's not completely black and white, but it's using a monochrome effect, applying this tint, which can be changed by changing the hue around and even the saturation. So we can maybe have a more cold background like that and having the image in the middle in its original colors. So that was just a very simple example of a selection used for adjusting the image in certain areas. But the only problem by using a selection like this is that the adjustment actually will be destructive. So it's applied directly on the image. Now, of course, you can save this as a separate file, but what if you change your mind and you wanted to have more details in the original colors? Well, once you did this, the only way to get back would be to undo your last step and then create another selection and then apply the adjustment. But let's not worry about that at this stage because I'm going to show you non-destructive ways of using adjustments. But for now, let's concentrate on the selections because the selections will be the same. We will just use them in slightly different way. But let's go back and try this selection again. So I'm just going to undo these last steps and I'm going to get rid of the selection by using Select, Deselect. When you create a selection with any of the tools, and for now, let's try the other marquee tool called elliptical marquee tool. So I just right clicked on the original one and I choose the other option from there. So when I select that one, I can show you that creating a selection doesn't mean that you have to keep it where it was created. Once you let go, you can move it around and you can even resize it. So you can go to the select menu and choose transform selection, which allows you to resize the selection without distorting the image itself. So this is not transforming the image, just the selection. Even without the transform selection, we can move the selection itself around. And once you're ready with your transformation on the selection, just accept it the same way you would accept a transformation. So I'm just going to click on commit, or you can press enter as well. If you continue to use the marquee tool, the next selection will remove the original one and start a new selection, because that's the way the marquee tool works by default. Now, of course, this can be changed either with shortcuts or the options in the options bar, but also useful to know that when you create a selection, a marquee selection, you can also hold down the space bar to reposition it. And once you repositioned, you can let the space bar go, but continue dragging your mouse. So the mouse was held down all along, and that way I can create my selection here, although I started it on the side of the image. If I want to add to this selection, I can switch to this mode, which is going to add to this selection, the already existing selection. And you can see I can draw more circles and they will join up into one selection. Or I can also switch to subtract from selection, with which I can remove from this selection. And there's also intersect, which will create a selection and keep whatever was within the original selection. So that's an intersection. Just like when drawing vector shapes in Photoshop, you can use shortcuts to maintain the original aspect ratio of a shape. So in case you are using marquee tools, when you click and drag and you hold down the shift key, you can maintain a perfect circle. And in case of the rectangle marquee tool, you would be able to create a perfect square selection. So holding down shift key will allow you to do that. In case of selections, you have to also be a little bit careful. If you hold down shift before you start drawing the square, that means you are adding to your previous selection. If you hold down alt before you start your selection, that will minus it, so subtract it. So in this case, for example, if I hold down shift and I keep drawing, you see it doesn't become a square yet, because the shift in this case just meant I'm going to add to my previous selection. But then when I let go shift, still holding down the mouse, then again press shift, will now count as the square option, or having equal sides to this shape. So the shift has two meanings whenever you draw selections with the marquee tools. But if you feel like it's confusing, just use the options here in the options bar. Now let me switch to another image and let's see how we can combine different marquee selections to be able to select this periscope. So I will zoom slightly closer, and then let's start with this ellipse here in the middle. So I'm just going to switch to the elliptical marquee tool and try to make a selection of that. Now you see I'm pretty close, but it might be easier to start the selection from the middle. For that, we can use the same shortcut what we've learned for the vector shapes. So if I go in the center and hold down the Alt key, with that I can start from the center of the shape, and I got much closer. But now I can also hold down the space to move this around, and until I get very close, I am going to keep using the space bar and keep adjusting my selection. Now if you feel like you can't get close enough, just let go and then use the transform selection option from the select menu, with which you can transform the selection and even distort it. Remember what we learned about free transform tool? That's exactly what you can use here as well. Holding down the command or control key, you can add distortion for the selection, and look how perfect this selection got straight away. I press enter and I'm going to continue with my selection. So now I would like to include the bar here, so that horizontal bar. So let's switch to the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm going to make a selection of that. But see, I lost my previous selection because I didn't hold down any shortcuts. So let me undo, and that luckily loads back my previous selection. So I'm going to switch to add to selection mode, and then I will make my selection, which will be added. So there you go, that's added. So now we can do the other side. If I again just start, let's say somewhere here, that was actually quite a good guess. But if I feel like I need to move it slightly up, I can use the space bar, drag it up a bit, and then I can finish this selection as well. So you can see that using this technique, combining shapes, you can create selections. And then, for example, using the move tool, we could lift this detail and maybe put it on another image, for example. Or we could keep it in place and just make it bigger using the free transform option. So we can go to edit, free transform, and then keep increasing its size. So if we wanted that detail to be bigger, or maybe slightly down or above, we can do all these kind of changes thanks to our original selection. Another important thing to know about selections is feathering. So let me show you this on an empty document. I'm just going to create a new one. Let's go to File, New, and there's our blank document there. So if I use the lasso tool, this is another typical selection tool. With this, I can show you what feather means, and also anti-alias. So both of these attributes are there in most of your selection tools. And let's just try first just turning these off. So I'm going to make a selection, just a random selection here. And then I'm going to fill this in with black color, which is my foreground color. So I can just press Alt or Option Backspace. That filled in that selection. Now let's turn on the anti-alias and then draw another selection here on the right. I'm going to again press Alt Backspace to fill that in. And then now I am going to increase the feather option, and let's just increase it up to 10 pixels, for example. Then I draw another selection once more. And when I press Alt Backspace, that will get filled in with black as well. So now I will go to select, deselect, and we can compare these selections. So when I zoom closer, you will notice that the first selection, which doesn't have feather or anti-alias, has a very rough edge around it. When we have a closer look at the edge detail of this second selection, this has a more softer edge thanks to the anti-alias that was applied on it. And then we have our third selection, which has a very soft edge thanks to the 10 pixel feather. So both anti-alias and feather helps to smooth the edges of your selection. Anti-alias will only use around 1 pixel around the edge to add shades of gray to create a bit of a transition between the two details, the details inside and outside of the selection. And if you increase that effect, that's when you get feathering. And the feather always going to rely on the pixel amount you set in the options bar. So the higher that amount, the softer the selection gets. So going back to our first example with the sunrise, we can actually try something here. If I use the elliptical marquee tool and I just increase the feather option, something like that, and then maybe even more we can increase. Then I create a selection around the boat. We can already check this with the quick mask and see that we have a soft edge around it. If we feel like it's not enough, we can also add feathering or increase the feathering later by going to the select menu and choose modify. So you will also find feather there. And also other options like contract, expand, smooth, and border. These are all very useful and quite simple to understand how they work. So just give them a try. But for now, I'm going to choose the feather. And let's say I would like to increase this to a really high feather value. So I'm going to type in 100 pixels. Now, once again, if I press Q, I can review how this selection is going to look like. So the marching ants view won't be able to show you exactly how this selection will work, only the quick mask. So feathering can't really be previewed in this normal view of your selection. But now that we have that selected, let's invert it like before. So select, inverse, and then let's choose the same adjustment we used also before, so the image adjustments black and white option. And I'm just going to click OK for now and go to select, deselect, and then we can see that nice soft selection that we applied, which works even better in this case than having a very sharp edge around the area that remains in colors. So these were the basic selection tools, the elliptical rectangular marquee tools and the lasso tool, which also has 2 additional options. But I'm going to talk about this and 2 other very important selection tools in the next video, when we will learn about how Photoshop can detect colors and based on that create selections.